I have Ron and I have Francisco here, Globalization Partners. Thank you very much for joining us for this great webinar to discuss about Brazil. Ron, this is your show, so please lead
Okay,
us.
thank you, Bruno. Hey, I'm Ron Slotin. I'm the Brazil Strategy Director for Drummond Advisors. I'm going to serve as a moderator today. We have two experts with us. They're going to share their experience for best strategies for opening your business operations in Brazil. I'd like to first introduce Francisco Mendez, who is the Senior Manager with Globalization Partners for their global operations. And Francisco, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and Globalization Partners.
Yes, of course. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the invite. Globalization Partners is a global employer of record. So we help businesses expand into other countries around the world without the hustle of getting or opening their own entity in their country. So we give them the opportunity to test the market, to run their businesses without them having to worry about opening an entity or how to hire their employees. So very nice to be here.
Great. And now I'd like to also introduce Bruno Drummond, who is the managing partner with Drummond Advisors, to tell us a little bit about himself and the company.
Hi, Ron. Thank you very much. So, Drummond Advisors focusing cross-border transactions, accounting, in tax, in legal. Those transactions happens mostly in Brazilian entities or Brazilians doing business in U.S. or U.S. doing business in Brazil. We also have clients outside of this this type of environment, but our focus is to welcome business that actually comes from globalization partners that they want to establish business in either Brazil or in US to have their own operation and a legal entity as a whole. Thank you very much for having us here, Ron, and thank you very much, Francisco, for joining us as well.
Sure. Well, this is a great time to talk about Brazil. I saw that the Wall Street Journal reported this week that Brazil's economy expanded at the fastest pace in 6 quarters. So to get right into it, Francisco, can you tell us about what is the employer of record? You know, some people may think that when you go to an international country, it may take a long time to get somebody hired, but you can actually get somebody hired in less than 30 days. Can you tell us about the process and what the global employer of record does?
That is correct, yes. Well, the employer of record is the company that will hold the legal and will become the legal employer for the people that will be hired on behalf of the company that wants to start businesses in other countries. So in this case, we have a US company that wants to start operations in Brazil. Instead of them having to go through all the entity setup process, they can seek the services of Globalization Partners so we can have their employee or that candidate that they have already located into the market, and we will be taking the responsibility of hiring that employee under their behalf. We will be managing all their human resources, everything related to human resources to that employee, to his onboarding, to his registration before the social security entities, make the proper contributions to the tax authority, to the social security authority, and manage all that relationship from start to finish. It will happen that, yeah.
It makes it very easy for a company to come into Brazil, have a full-time employee. They have full control over the employee. All the taxes are paid, all the insurance, healthcare, everything is taken care of.
That is correct. That is what we do. A, we have a setup very complete of a full package of benefits that puts us into a competitive market, and we are able to uh, provide a full package of benefits to their employee, so it has a competitive package against the market.
Yeah, I think this is a great service that companies need to know about because it makes it easy for them to come in and start building their business in the market. So let's talk about Bruno. A lot of companies when they come in and they need in Brazil to get their CNPJ, which is like their federal tax ID number. Um, some companies come in and start their own companies. Some companies come in Brazil through acquisitions. What can you say about the process in your experience that can help speed up the process to get their federal tax ID number?
Federal tax ID number, Ron, for instance, is the first step to create nexus in Brazil from the entity. The solution that Globalization Partners does, it's one step before that, correct? Which is fantastic because it allows people to expand, test the waters before even introducing to a much a high commitment, and that commitment might take longer whatsoever to be with nexus employment and so forth. Usually CNPJ usually takes about between a day to a 3 days process, but that is still needed to have a few documents to be translated, postulated. So you need to apostille some of these documents, and you also need to create a power of attorney for a Brazilian local Brazilian resident to be responsible for that EIN number.
I think
After those doc,
I was going to say that's an important point that people should realize that they either need a Brazilian national or a power of attorney Brazilian to open their company in Brazil. Is that correct? Or can it be a foreigner with a permanent visa?
correct. They have to be resident to Brazil.
Okay.
So in the end of the day, he can be a visa holder or green card holder in Brazil, or a Brazilian citizen, but it has to live in Brazil, resident
Okay.
in Brazil. So that POA allows that person to be responsible for the tax ID, federal tax ID of the U.S. entity or any entity in Brazil. But
Now, will
that's
companies need to have a certain amount of money in the central bank in Brazil to open up their entity there?
no, no. The CNPJ does not need any requirement in terms of money deposit or invested in the country. That's the first step for Nexus. So
Okay.
my understanding, some of you might have Francisco clients that might need to create a CNPJ for dealing or selling products, and which is okay. But after that, you start creating nexus and responsibilities in the country that you born, which in this case is Brazil. Is
Okay.
that correct,
I also want to say
Francisco?
that for everyone that's
I'm sorry.
watching the webinar, please ask questions anytime during the presentation. We would like to make it interactive. So if you have any questions on any of these topics as we go along, please write to us and we will respond. So, Bruno, you've worked with a lot of companies, and Francisco yourself in Brazil. And I think the key about being successful in Brazil is having the strategy part. Having the very competitive in Brazil, so it's understanding the market, doing the market research, doing your due diligence, understanding the taxes. Can you talk a little bit about the process of why some companies are successful and other companies may not be as successful?
What happens here is that it will depend on the type of business and the type of approach that the client or the U.S. company would like to get from the Brazilian market. We can have clients that would remain years and years under our platform without even trying to set up their own entity. They feel that their business is good the way they are handling through a third party. However, there are times that given the type of business that they are doing, they will have to eventually uh, start with the setting up of their entity. So what we do is we manage all the human resources relationship part with their candidates or their employees, and this is the tricky part on doing businesses in Brazil, having to comply with all the local regulations in Brazil, which at the end causes risks and a lot of administrative burden that companies will have to deal eventually. So in these cases, this is how we help them to navigate through the complex scenario of employment laws in Brazil, and that way it becomes a safer relationship of them with their employee and how they handle their business in Brazil.
Gotcha. And Bruno, I see we have a question from someone asked, how much roughly are the business taxes in Brazil, the corporate taxes versus what the U.S. taxes are now?
Right now, usually the Brazilians pay 34% income tax. There's three methods of tax. They call simple taxation, the presumptive method, and the real method. Real method, it's similar to the U.S. They pay 34% on the net income base. Presumption, it's about 17% of the sales. And simple, it is also sales base. Any foreigners that invest in Brazil, they only have the opportunity to invest on presumption or in real method taxation. For the 34% income tax, it's also that's direct tax. There are also some indirect tax, which is what we call employment tax, product taxes, service tax, and so forth, which is similar to sales tax in the U.S. or property tax in the U.S. that we see along the states in the U.S. USA.
Yeah, I would say one of the keys of being successful in Brazil is understanding the tax system. What's your import tax going to be? Sometimes when your product moves, you have to pay different state taxes. So understanding and labor taxes, understanding the full package of taxes is key to being successful in Brazil.
No, for sure. It's very important because you have such a high burden, and depending on the industry, every percentage you might be struggling in terms of cash flows, correct?
Right.
If you have a major change in cash flows due to percentage, it can really trigger out a cash crunch.
And Bruno, can you address if a company's looking at setting up a branch office or a subsidiary or a new company, how they get money into the country and how do they get it out? Repatriation of funds is either as equity or loan. Can you just talk about that just for a minute?
Sure. When you move from a stage of looking to try to do business and actually see that that business is it's actually feasible, and you want to invest in establishing a company in Brazil, you can fund your business in two ways. You can fund it through equity or through debt. Right. Eventually, stakeholders in Brazil don't like to see an entity over leverage because that doesn't allows or doesn't give any of the stakeholders in Brazil credibility to see that that company is going to eventually survive for too long. So you need to understand that the Brazilian also has cap fin cap rules for the percentage of debt versus equity that you might hold on your balance sheet. So you need to take that in consideration. Otherwise, your interest expense won't be allowed to be as deductible as needed. So when you to bring the money on a debt version, it's easy because you always have to manage a contract between related party. That contract usually you register in the central bank and you can repatriate it cash or interest anytime very easy because it's an internal contract and you just need that contract to support the cross border transaction. When you do equity, you need to not just register to the central bank, but also you need to register into the corporation department, divisions of department in the state that you're doing business, which that gets a little more complicated because if you want to repatriate it or if you want to pay dividends over the equity that you invested, you need also approved by the same board of corporations that you registered the equity. So then you have an extra step. Mostly of the countries, throughout our practice here, we see many clients complain, "Oh, it's easy to invest in Brazil, send the money to spend to grow, but when the money comes back, it's so hard." Well, it is hard because sometimes, actually, most of the times, you see corporate governance on these entities or subsidiaries in Brazil lack of documentation. So
Yeah,
what happens?
that's a key point that I hear from companies also. And if they plan ahead of time and they have the right strategy, then it's not that difficult to
No,
repatriate money back out.
no, and you can. What happens? Well, sometimes you have to register in Brazil. You have to register all the changes that happen in your company. Small change can be moving. If you move your location, if you change your directors, if you change, if you increase capital. So every of these transactions, you need to register into the corporation divisions, correct? And
Right.
that's becomes a little harder. So sometimes, as a startup, you lose focus of that, which is okay because that's not your focus, correct? But then you send the money down to Brazil, you capitalize the entity, and then you move 3 or 4 locations, and then you change a name, and over a sudden you have at least 4 fines that you need to send it to the corporation divisions before you even send the money back, and that's where it gets a little interesting,
Right. So
in time
people just
consuming. Right?
Yeah, people need. I just wanted just to bring up the topic so people will know about it, and that's kind of a good transition into our next topic because a lot of the ways that companies enter into Brazil, and how I first got to Brazil was through a company making acquisition, and there's there's a lot that goes into the acquisition and the partnerships and the due diligence and the legal agreement. And part of that agreement is also the labor force. And Francisco, I was going to ask you to talk a little bit about how the employer of record can help facilitate the M&A, because one of the big deals is when it closes, you have to be able to transfer those employees from one company to another company.
Just to give you an example, let's say we, as the employer of record, we have our own entity in Brazil. So let's say we get approached by Google in the US. They have a very important candidate that they want to hire in Brazil. However, they don't have their own entity set up in Brazil. This is where we take over the situation. We create an agreement with the company in the US, in this case Google, and we are able to hire these candidates on their behalf. So we start with the initial offer to their candidate, the review of the employment contract, all of our employment contracts in each of the countries that we work. They are legally compliant. They have been through several reviews. So they are in compliance with the local regulations, and also they can um, take out the risk from our clients and put it into avoid any possible risk that happen during that employment relationship.
So let's say
Once
that I was going to say, what if a company's buying another company and they need to transfer 10 employees over 15 employers through merger acquisition? They can also do that through your company, and those people from day one will have health insurance. They
that's
will have
correct.
bill vouchers, everything that they need, and I think it makes it easier instead of the company having to search for different health insurance options. You have everything to make that
That's
transition very
correct.
smooth.
And also the situation in Brazil is that, for example, for a new company that's starting with, let's say, 20, 30 from a merger that they want to hire on their behalf, a health insurance, they won't have the same benefits that our company right now, Globalization Partners, has in Brazil, like waiving waiting periods or uh, covering pre-existing conditions. So this is a very advantageous situation in Brazil, and many employees seek this when they are moving to another company, that they can remain with the same level of benefits that they used to have. And one important thing is the private health insurance that they are entitled to us.
And that's a good transition to our next topic I want to talk about is understanding the Brazil labor laws, because there's some specific regulations in Brazil that's a little different than the U.S. and other countries. And Bruno, maybe you could talk a little bit about 13th salary and term of service guarantee. And Francisco, feel free to join in.
Well, I think one of the great things about globalization partners servers, it's that it's, I think, and you can correct me, Francisco, is the first uh, contact with the change between U.S. labor uh, aspects and Brazilian labor aspects, which is totally different. Do
Correct.
you agree with that?
Yes, in fact, one thing that we put into the table once that we are introducing the client into the Brazilian market is that employment at will does not exist in Brazil.
Yeah.
That is something that we reinforce a lot with our clients, saying that if you want to terminate an employment relationship in Brazil, you the employees are entitled to severance payments, to several things, and that's something that we reinforce a lot with clients coming on board with us.
And it happens every day. Correct.
That's
It's not
correct.
something
Yes.
that's 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 one thing, and then you have other types of benefits that you don't see in US per se yet. Might get there. You have a secure, insurance, FGTS, which they call the FGTS. It's basically an employment insurance that it's paid directly to the employee fund. Um, and one
So
of
you
the
pay. So if you let an employee go, you still have to pay him a certain amount for a certain time period.
usually depends on the contract that you have, correct? But under the CLT law, you don't have to pay. You only have to pay the severance under that law. Correct. You might have to pay penalties for firing the employee and so forth.
There's the prior notice that you need to comply. Sometimes
Yeah.
you pay the prior notice in lieu of you you avoid the prior notice and pay for it in lieu of. So there
Yeah.
are some.
When he prior notice is if you want to fire someone today without excuse, correct? You don't have a reason for, or just the reason is that your business doing well, but badly, is that you fired, but you need to give them 30 days work or 30 days full pay, and that person can be here or can also uh, can continue work or actually look for another job during that period.
So explain a little bit for somebody in the U.S. about what is a 13th salary? Does that mean they get paid 2 months salary in December at the end of the year, or is that divided in a couple months, or how does that work?
13 salary is the same idea of here. In Brazil, usually you get paid once a month, correct? And the 13 salary is basically to accommodate it every 2 weeks payroll cycle, correct? If you break a yearly salary in 26 rounds payroll cycles, you eventually have 13 salaries in the U.S. In Brazil, you only pay your salary once a month. You could advance your salary, basically one first 15 days you pay in advance, and then you pay the remainder of in the end of the month. But the 13th salary was brought into the place to make sure that you can have 13th salary, which will be similar to U.S. when you have 26 uh, 26 payroll cycles. 13 salaries happen. You receive on the 15th of November and then 15th of December. Accommodated that salary for the end of the year, and eventually that's almost like a extra salary for Brazilians to pay for. I would say year-end costs and actually beginning of the year costs, which is quite normal when you go through the exercise of school year and so forth.
Gotcha. Francisco, anything else you want to add to anything with labor in Brazil?
Yeah, well, in fact, also going through the same line of the 13th salary, it is a very common benefit given across Latin America, usually known as Christmas bonus also because it's given during the Christmas period. And also, it's very important that besides the 13th salary that Brazilians receive, there's also a statutory benefit, which is one third of the vacation bonus. So they are also, when they take vacation, they are also entitled to an additional bonus.
Gotcha. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about with is visa applications and what are the options for international workers. So if I was based in the U.S. and the company opens up in Brazil, what's the process for getting a permanent visa so I can be allowed to work in Brazil?
With globalization partners, we can sponsor visas for any foreign that would like to uh, work in Brazil. The visa permits, they are usually given for up to 2 years, and this is a process that if requested by our client, we can manage this for them on their behalf.
And how long does it usually take for an international worker to get a permanent visa for Brazil? Does the company have
Um,
to put money into the central bank for this process?
we have 45 working days, more or less, that the of the timing for the process. So we the analysis is done by the General Coordination of Immigration. This is done in around 30 to 45 working days. Then the authorization is given and it goes to the Brazilian consulate in which the foreign currently is residing. So this takes up to 3 to 5 working days. Then the employee, the foreign, will pick up his visa at the consulate, 10 working days more or less. And then once that the employee arrives into Brazil, they have around 30 working days to work on all the other documentation that they need. They need their personal ID for tax authorities. That's called the CPF. It's equivalent to the CNPJ that companies require, and other certain documents that they need so they can be able to open their bank account or hire personal services. So if we, given this timeline, in 2 months, more or less, the employee can have his work permit to start working with you.
Well, one of the good news is that now coming from the U.S., you don't need a travel visa into Brazil. So it makes it a lot easier for people to travel to Brazil, and everybody should know about that. You can stay for 90 days, and you can register to stay for another 90 days. And
That's
that's good
correct.
news because every time I used to get on the plane in Brazil, somebody didn't know they needed a visa, and they wouldn't let them on the airplane. So we won't have that issue anymore.
That's good.
So, Bruno, I want to ask you about, as companies look to do international business, whether it's Brazil or other countries, they need to know about transfer pricing. I have a friend
Correct.
that works for the IRS in the U.S., and he specializes in transfer pricing audits. So companies need to think about this ahead of time. Can you talk a little bit about what transfer pricing, why we have it? I think a lot of times, companies can be audited for this, and especially companies that I think that have IP offshore or they have high profits on their products. The taxing authorities in Brazil and the U.S. would be taking a look at.
Yeah, basically, transfer pricing happens when you have control of price that you're selling and control of price that you're buying. So basically, it can be a related party transaction. So when you're selling something to another entity that you have ownership, you have control, or when you sell something to an entity that you have control through business relationship. For instance, uh, let's say I sell service to actually Francisco sells service to me from Francisco's in Mexico today, correct? So Francisco, the only client that he has is myself. So there is a issue of transfer price because the fact that I'm the only client of Francisco, I have control of his price, correct? If I call Francisco, say Francisco, we need to cut your service by 5-10%. I have that control. Otherwise, I can call somebody else and do it. And Francisco say, "No, Bruno, don't worry. I'm gonna cut your price." That's a that's another moment that transfer price arises. In these two moments, um, the fact that you have control of what you paying and what you're selling, correct? In that case, none of the agency, the Internal Revenue Agency, either Brazilians or U.S., has to be comfortable with the margins that you use or you practice in that transaction. Either in Brazil, in this case here, Francisco, either in Mexico or either in U.S. Does that
So
make sense?
I guess the main goal is that they want you to sell at fair market price for your products, whether it's in the U.S. or Brazil. Is that a
That's
good summary?
correct. Yeah. So you can't play out with your margins. You can't play out with your prices. You can't play out with your
And is
your
that
transaction.
something companies should have their accounting department to know about ahead of time and have it on their
Any
book? How do they prepare for that?
any company that sells outside of your nationality, correct? When I say nationality, if you U.S. entity that sells product or receives products from another country or service, you have to take in consideration transfer price. And if you're selling to an entity in Brazil or to Mexico, for instance, that it's your own entity, then transfer price is for sure an issue. It's not
Gotcha.
a
Because
question.
you can be audited, so you got to have all the documentation there. We've got an
Oh,
interesting
you can be not just audited, but you can have penalties. You can
the
have
penalties also. Yes.
adjustments and so forth.
We have an interesting question. So the question is, the perception of Bolsonaro is that the government is more business friendly, especially in terms of regulatory rollbacks. I'll ask both of you, what specific changes have you seen or do you anticipate from his presidency? Do you see any risk in terms of security unrest or anything else? I think there's some pension reform that got passed in the Congress, but Bruno, can you talk a little bit about the political and economic atmosphere that you see in Brazil now?
Well, Brazil has increased the GDP in the last quarter for the best quarter in 6 quarters, so it's a year now. They did had a reduction of interest rate. The interest rate is going down. They had increase of labor force, like so. For this, I think it's second, third month in a row that we had hire more people than fired,
Yeah, so we
which
reduced the unemployment rate went down.
went down, which is amazing because there were for almost 3 years or basically almost 12 quarters that we are going down with over 12%. We went from 7% to 12% of a unemployment rate, and now it's start going moving back to hiring positions and expanding. Interest rate is low. There's a lot of foreign capital coming into Brazil in startup world. They're moving fast. There's very interesting business models. The pension reform passed will give us more stability on the pension. The new government is pushing for a tax change. Ain't not gonna happen this year, but probably next year, which will be very interesting. And in mid-November, they pass another package to ease it up, doing business, not just government, but a business to B2B business, which we might not see effects this year, but the first quarter of 2020 will be great impact. So
You think it's moving in the right directions as far as business?
yeah, in terms of business, the all the change capable to change throughout the political spectrum, correct?
Yeah.
Any new law, it's hard to pass through a new government. It happens in the U.S., happens in any other country, but in Brazil, it's anything now. It's getting a big impact.
Yeah. And Francisco, I'd be interested in your view since you handle all of Latin America also. Brazil must be 60-70% of the South American market. So as you talk to international companies, are they all prioritizing to come into Brazil, or do you see that happening more now?
It has been happening more now. Last year that we opened our own entity in Brazil, we started receiving several companies that wanted to start businesses in Brazil. This year, it exploded. Each month we are having several new clients, several new employees being hired through our platform in Brazil. So I haven't seen anything preventing new companies to enter into the Brazilian market. I think that right now it's a good opportunity for companies to start looking into Brazil to expand their businesses into the South American region.
Yeah, because once they're in Brazil and they have a base there, they can start doing business with the Mercosur companies and the other companies in South America. And Brazil's, with over 200 million people, such a large market. So I'd like to ask anybody that's been participating in our webinar if they have any questions at this time. It can be on any subject related to Brazil. I think the U.S.-Brazil relationship is very good right now. Brazil, like any, the economy's up and down, but I feel like it's starting to go up now for business opportunities for international companies. If we don't have any other questions, I want to thank Francisco and Bruno for sharing your experience with us. I want to thank the audience for tuning in with us. If you have any questions, we are available to follow up. Please send us an email or give us a call. We'd be glad to answer any questions you have. And we're very excited and optimistic about business in Brazil for 2020. And we look forward to future webinars with everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francisco. Thank you,
you.
Ron. Very appreciate it. Have a great day out there.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you all.